How does collections.defaultdict work? I've read the examples in Python docs, but still can't figure out what this method means. Can somebody help? Here are two examples from the Python docs. And the parameters int and list are for what?
Usually, a Python dictionary throws a key error if you try to get an item with a key that is not currently in the dictionary. The default dict in contrast will simply create any items that you try to access, provided of course they do not exist yet. To create such a default item, it calls the function object that you pass to the constructor. More precisely, it's an arbitrary callable object, which includes function and type objects. For the first example, default items are created using int, which will return the integer object to 0. For the second example, default items are created using list, which returns a new empty list object.
Defaultdict means that if a key is not found in the dictionary, then instead of a key error being thrown, a new entry is created. The type of this new entry is given by the argument of defaultdict. For example,
defaultdict. The standard dictionary includes the method setDefault for retrieving a value and establishing a default if the value does not exist. By contrast, defaultdict lets the caller specify the default value to be returned upfront when the container is initialized. As defined by Doug Hellman in the Python standard library by example. How to use defaultdict. Import defaultdict. Initialize defaultdict. Initialize it by passing callable as its first argument mandatory. Quargs as its second argument optional. Or how does it works? As is a child class of standard dictionary, it can perform all the same functions. But in case of passing an unknown key, it returns the default value instead of error. For X. In case you want to change default value, overwrite default_factory. Or examples in the question. Example 1. As int has been passed as default_factory, any unknown key will return 0 by default. Now as the string is passed in the loop, it will increase the count of those alphabets in D. Example 2. As a list has been passed as default_factory, any unknown non-existent key will return E. list by default. Now as the list of tuples is passed in the loop, it will append the value in the D color.
Dictionaries are a convenient way to store data for later retrieval by name, key. Keys must be unique, immutable objects, and are typically strings. The values in a dictionary can be anything. For many applications, the values are simple types such as integers and strings. It gets more interesting when the values in a dictionary are collections, lists, dicts, etc. In this case, the value, an empty list or dict, must be initialized the first time a given key is used. While this is relatively easy to do manually, the default dict type automates and simplifies these kinds of operations. A default dict works exactly like a normal dict, but it is initialized with a function, default factory, that takes no arguments and provides the default value for a non-existent key. A default dict will never raise a key error. Any key that does not exist gets the value returned by the default factory. Here is another example on how using defaultdict, we can reduce complexity. In conclusion, whenever you need a dictionary, and each element's value should start with a default value, use a default dict.